like to watch politics, but I'm glad I'm not there all the time. You know? And I guess that's my fault. I'm not there all the time. So I would say, if you're interested in trying to build something, and it doesn't matter the size, if you're interested in trying to build something, maybe you start by just setting up a bunch of individual meetings with people within your church, your congregation, your network. Maybe somebody sanctions that and says, what do we want to be out there that's relevant? Or what do we want to be in here that we can invite others into the process? You'll have fun.
One last nihilism, well, it's not your nihilism, he got me into COVID, but it was also helpful, was the idea of area of concern and a circle of concern and circle of influence. You have your circle of concern, you know, as you're mentioning the news programs and everything.
Yeah.
And if you live in your circle of concern, it diminishes. If that's just where you live, it diminishes and your circle of influence disappears. So really focusing on, yes, I have these concerns. They're going to inform what I want to do in the world. But what really is my circle of influence in this community? You know, so anyway.
Yeah. The other thing about gentrified communities, they're fascinating phenomena because people rub up against each other, but they literally live in separate worlds. And it's so interesting to watch, you know, when we build the bridge, people are actually now walking down streets and saying hello to each other because they actually have had a common experience, you know, and that's the beginning of building community. And it's a phenomena that we have to address in our urban centers all over the country, in fact, all over the world. My wife writes books about it. She's a professor at St. John's. And then, you know, the last media they published was gentrification in Asian cities, Europe, here, everywhere. This phenomenon that people want to live in the city, and therefore when they're coming into the city, they're displacing or creating stresses on other folks. You know, the only thing that I tell a lot of the young people who come with guilt, privilege is the guilt. When they come with guilt, gentrification is not a micro issue. I mean, when you're making $20,000, $30,000 as a waiter, and you want to party in this really cool neighborhood, you're not the one who's, you know, building the 40-story towers on the waterfront. It's your community, but you want to get to learn and help those in the community that have been here longer than Earth. It's not, because sometimes it's a simple age divide, and that's really dangerous, I think. You know, you get old and it's like, I don't know what's met with these kids. You know, I mean, that doesn't allow for a future for us. I mean, like, you know, we have to fight against that. Those of us who are older.
And the thing
it's good for me because he interrupts me. You know, I mean, otherwise, you guys are gonna have to get up and leave at some time.
Yeah, as Keynote said in relation to churches, and this is a very Pauline notion of all you who have, you know, died and been born in Christ are one. I mean, that's why we have the tagline. I mean, nobody knows, you know, Neil and I talk about theological stuff all the time. And a lot of this is in the DNA of the organization, but it's a non-religious organization out there in the world. But that's why it's neighbors helping neighbors. You know, some of the stuff you were just saying is it really is not, it's really about understanding. And that's what, you know, Jesus talked about that. Like, who is my neighbor? Who is nigh to me? And coming to grips with that and really saying we live in this community, we're going to know each other, we're going to start to, you know, we're not going to disappear, allow people to disappear to each other. And so are there any thoughts or questions or?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand. So what is it that the blue vans are bringing?
Okay, let me tell you, let me throw that, because we didn't have the first video. So every day there are, and it's on your map there, we have a central kitchen, which is at Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And at that place, volunteers come each day, 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and they package meals. Let's not get into the original model stuff. That was just
cooking.
Yeah, they cook and package meals. Those meals eventually go on two trucks, and they go out at about 12 o'clock, and they go to a locale in the community. And when they get to that community, volunteers from that part of the community get on the truck and they serve the neighbors that they know in the community. And these are all, everybody knows where the trucks are going to be on a daily basis. So we have two trucks. We have a van as well. There's a whole other thing. We now have a cafe, but that's a whole other issue, Angel Cafe.
So it's lunches, hot lunches, we try to get out prepared by neighbors, served by neighbors to neighbors. That's kind of, the communication among people is organized around. So preparing the food, distributing the food, the people eating the food. Then what happens is on any given day, we have green market relationships. So we might get additional food that we don't cook, and that will go out and we'll have a pop-up green market right next to the stage. Another day, we might have someone from the local hospital and they're signing people up for Medicaid or Obamacare. So the trucks allow us to go to places where we build the relationship without without the limitations of a location and a building.
And it's great advertising too, because they're big trucks. And it's remarkable how many people in the neighborhood, if I mention North Brooklyn Angels, I say, the big truck, the blue trucks you ever see? Oh yeah, I've seen that. I know that. So people are now visually understanding that there's this community organization that you can tap into. And we have all volunteer drivers. I just think it's entertaining. Four of them are retired firefighters. Well, one's not retired, but somehow all of our drivers are firefighters and then 2 airline pilots. I don't know how that happened.
And the firefighters wanted bells and whistles, but they said, no, we can't put you guys will be running lights and stuff. We can have you doing that.
I drive as well.
They are.
Did that help? Did
Yeah,
we
no,
help you a
I
little?
just couldn't quite figure out all the pieces. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And then the Angel Baby events, one second, the Angel Baby events are like pop-up events. And then there's other projects we could talk about, but it was just confusing.
Like we're coming up to
But he's
Thanksgiving
gonna talk
season.
about it anyway,
Thanksgiving season, we kind of have a threefold. We want to have a really hot, wonderful meal to go out on the truck the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday before, desserts and all. We're going to have multiple sites for Thanksgiving, sit down, and then we're going to distribute for those who can cook 1,000 turkeys. So after I leave you guys, I have to go pick pockets.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. The trucks themselves, how did you get them? Were they donated? And then the other, a little bit about how you maneuver within communities where developers want to come in and build housing. How do
Well,
you get?
that's our whole community. So first of all, the first truck was grant money from Episcopal Ministries of Long Island and some additional money from the diocese. And that was supposed to take 6 months to build, and it took about 1.5 years to build, which was a nightmare. Then we got a second truck, which was a group of affluent folks in the neighborhood who gather a real neighborhood kind of benefactor, a guy named Norm Brodsky, and his friends gather for something called Whiskey Wednesdays, where they just meet on Wednesday and they talk and brainstorm. And Neil went down there and picked a pocket and talked to them. And they were really, they're part of our organization. They're excited about it. And it was kind of like, look, we need another truck. Would you guys be interested if we could do it? We did it for much less money, smaller truck. And that one is now up and running.
What was the other?
There was another,
Developers wanting to come in, because oftentimes, I live in Harlem, and
Right.
oftentimes, I know of one instance where a developer actually came to church on Sunday, and at the time of the peace was asking if anyone knew who owned that building now.
Well-
We would buy it, and of course, I said, why? And he didn't buy it, but I mean, that's the kind of intrigue that goes on
Yeah,
when
because
folks are trying to get
the
your property.
gentrification is coming your way. I know.
Yeah.
Coming your way.
Oh, it's
Some
there.
of it's there
It's
already.
it's already there.
And it's
there.
coming,
It's been
coming
there for
more.
years, yeah.
I mean, anything that will connect people to the grid in Manhattan.
I mean,
That's great.
Neil can, I'll say a word and then he can probably correct me. But I mean, that whole waterfront in Green is one of the largest developments from Long Island City straight through down.
Yes.
And it's unbelievable. And Neil grew up there, so he's really seen it. I grew up in another part of Brooklyn. We've all seen this happen. That's global capital. That's not local folks coming in. And one of the things we do, we have relationships with some of them. And just like people organize and talk about community benefit agreements, we're putting pressure on developers to participate in the community, help donate money in the community, but also our Angel Babies project, and we've partnered with some of the buildings themselves to see, like, folks move into these buildings, and there's a ferry that goes to Manhattan, and you can live there. And this is exactly what Neil's wife writes books about, parallel communities. I live in the community. It's an isolating position. They go to the particular restaurants in the community. There's not even in many ways an entree into the community. And so we do have a lot of volunteers that we're bringing in from those buildings, both through the Angel Babies projects and others, to actually get to know this is not just a luxury community neighborhood. This isn't a lifestyle neighborhood. There's people that have been here for years. We could, as Neil said, you could beat people up over, like, you live in that building and you're this and that, but that's just gonna separate people out.
Yeah, the other thing, again, I'm not an expert nationally, but I would think it's pretty similar. There's huge debate going on about how affordable housing can be created. In the 70s and 80s in New York, there was empty lots, dollar lots, and nonprofits would build the house. The property was cheap, it was abundant. People could do that. In the current environment, as you mentioned, with developers, thing about developers is that developers organize capital, and the question becomes, like, when the North Brooklyn waterfront was rezoned, it was at that night, I was with a bishop from the Roman Catholic Church in charge of housing for 40 years. 4,433 affordable housing units were agreed to. He said to me, that's more than I've done in 40 years. When we look back on it, they got away cheap. Right? So, but this concept that if they're going to build, how much power can we create to hold them accountable to get a fair amount of affordability? And it's a real struggle because the cheap land is disappearing, or they're moving to the next, deeper into Brooklyn, and they're going to gentrify that community that isn't by buying relatively cheap.
Yeah.
So when I got into this in the 80s, you could buy a lot in Williamsburg for $1 and build houses. Now that same lot is worth $5 million. So things are changing. I imagine right where you are, there were probably some active housing tenant organizations. That's where I would probably go and put pressure on the elected officials to get as much. If developers are going to develop, they got to be held accountable because.
And they're trying to change.
They're in the middle of trying to change. They feel like they gave them too much tax abatement, and they could actually get a lot more for their money. And I doubt that's just a New York discussion. I would think it's a national.
And then you have to strengthen the local rent regulations, rent stabilization, because the De Blasio administration and their plan for subsidizing all affordability through luxury housing, just on its face doesn't make any sense. It's like
the only thing
you make the neighborhood
what it is right now on the projects. Let's see, if they had not built the projects.
That's where we're all.
That's where.
But now they want to
19 stories, they're dense, they're people of all different kinds of income.
But now folks want to put high rises in the parking lots.
Pulling up in front of Cooper Park. Cooper Park is a public housing complex. If it wasn't a public housing complex, it would have been gone a long time.
They tried last year to develop retail on the core of public housing on the basis that it would bring in additional income. And the retail folks kibosh that because they didn't want to be in the lobby of public housing. But if you get the Tommy Hill figures down in the lobby, then it's gone. You know, it's gone. So,
I don't know.
Everybody, I mean, the thing about public housing, everybody should, even if you're not in this business, understand there's never been a better idea
right.
by the federal government about housing people. No matter how terrible it got at certain times, it was always owned.
But I can tell you when the rezoning was happening, was the largest single geographic rezoning in North Brooklyn. The Bloomberg administration originally had people telling us, they had city planning people and housing, that affordable housing wasn't a planning issue. And during that time period, if you had your ear open, all of a sudden, the advocates changed one word. And people started talking about affordable housing, not low-income public housing. And all of a sudden, a majority of people in the city came, at least in North Brooklyn, and I think in the city, said, that's right, everybody should have it. But the power of language is fascinating. And then Bloomberg fired his people and he hired these big affordable housing experts to finish out the rezone. And that's why there were 4,000 units of affordable housing negotiated.
Then you redefine what affordable is.
Yeah, so back to your original statements. Now that's crazy. You change a word and everything changes. And you just don't know where that is. But you're trying to build coalition. And a lot of people looked at affordable housing, they didn't see an identity with it. Excuse me, with public low-income housing. When people change the language, everybody's like, yeah, I need affordable housing. My rent's going. And that changed the politics because I like fell down amazed. I was like, so we're doing all this work. We should just change a few words here and there. You know? Are we?
Anybody else?
I told you be careful. You guys probably have lunch out there. So
We're just scratching the surface.
One more presentation before.
yeah. All right. Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's fun. To do this.
And if anybody does have something they're working on, you let folks know. Our emails are there somewhere.
And you're welcome.